Hey, I'm Jenny Davis, and thank you for joining us today for the ABA Journal's 10 Questions Live, our monthly conversation with innovators, interrupters, and just plain interesting lawyers. I'm here today with Rajesh. He leads the cybersecurity and data protection privacy practice at Mayer Brown in Washington, D.C. He's also co-leader of the firm's national security practice and a member of the ABA Standing Committee on Law and National Security. Now, I just want to interject here that we are having some computer issues, so if I seem a little choppy or my audio is not synced, I do apologize for any difficulty that is causing. But back to Mr. Day. We are really excited to speak with him today. He has a fascinating resume. He was counsel to the 9/11 Commission, and he helped to draft that historic final report. Senate committee that drafted and implemented intelligence reform legislation. And he was staff secretary at the White House and deputy assistant to the president. And one of his responsibilities included reviewing all written materials that landed on President Obama's desk. Most recently, he was general counsel to the National Security Agency. And in that capacity, he helped to lead the agency through the Snowden Affair. A partner at Mayer Brown before leaving for the NSA. And when he left the agency, he returned to the firm and to private practice last March. And if you'd like to read the print interview, that is archived at abajournal.com, and it appeared in the October issue of the magazine. Now, there's so much to cover today, but let me start by welcoming you, Rajesh, to 10 Questions Live, for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jenny, and thanks to all of your listeners.
Well, so before we start talking about your amazing career and all the reader questions we've received, in which we will try to get to as many of them as we can, I have to bring up what's going on now with current events. It seems like every time I refresh my browser, there's some kind of a issue with hacking or found emails, lost emails, like maybe emails where you don't know where they came from, but now they're posted. And it seemed to me like this would be than ever if you were a privacy, cybersecurity, data protection lawyer. So my question to you, I guess, is it? I mean, is what's happening now with the election and the emails, and how does that relate, or does it relate to what you do every day in your practice?
Well, thank you. Well, business is certainly busy, so I think cybersecurity is certainly top of mind. And I think recent events demonstrate a few things. One, cybersecurity is a challenge for all sectors of society, whether you're a political party, whether you're the US government, whether you're a private company or an individual like you and me. So it is a pervasive issue that will be a challenge for a generation. Two, cybersecurity is not just about the stealing of information, which it has been or had been historically. Cyber means are used to influence events. We've seen that with the current news. But cybersecurity is also about preventing the manipulation of lots of other things, whether it's the manipulation of physical objects in our Internet of Things now, or the manipulation of data. And finally, now that we've seen the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Homeland Security attribute some of these recent events to senior members of the Russian government, we also can see that all of us, private companies, political parties, are facing, at times, very sophisticated adversaries, nation states. And that should be sobering to all of us.
Now, speaking of your practice with cybersecurity, cyber protection and national security, we have a reader question. It's, what do you feel led to your current career? And I wanted to kind of add to that and ask, I know that you were a partner at Mayer Brown before NSA. You left for the NSA. What did you do before that? And was your time at the NSA kind of transformative, and did it affect your current position at the firm?
Certainly. Well, I think my introduction to national security matters generally really came about with the service I had as part of the staff for the 9/11 Commission. And that was, for me, a very transformative moment. It gave me a window into how our national security apparatus works, how the intelligence community is structured, and how our counterterrorism efforts were evolving post 9/11. With respect to cybersecurity in particular, as part of the national security landscape, for me, that interest really started when I served in the White House. And as part of that job, as you mentioned, I would review everything that would go to President Obama, memos, threat materials, that sort of thing. And so I started to gain a perspective on how important cybersecurity was becoming for the leader of the free world, and how important, of course, it should be for all of us. After leaving the White House and going to NSA to serve as the general counsel, that really cemented both my interest and deepened my knowledge in cybersecurity matters. Because one thing a lot of people may not realize is that in addition to the foreign intelligence mission, the spying mission that everyone thinks of when they think of NSA, NSA also has what is called an information assurance mission, which is really about cyber defense of classified government communications networks. Think of classified emails or getting classified information to our men and women in the field in some very dangerous places in the world. And so I started to understand and appreciate how important the security of that information really was.
So we have a lot of questions from readers, as I said, and a lot of people wanting to know more about your career trajectory. So I guess the best way to go through them is chronologically. So I'm going to move us back to when you were in law school. We have a reader who asked, what type of attorney did you see yourself becoming when you graduated from law school?
Well, when I was in law school and throughout my career, I really had an interest in public policy issues, civil rights issues, and international legal issues. So when I was a student, I assumed that would lead me into a career regarding international human rights issues. That seemed like the natural trajectory, and I spent a summer in law school at the War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia as a summer clerk there. I think over the course of my career, one lesson I've learned is it's really important to keep an open mind and to allow opportunity and serendipity to take you where it may. And so it was a sequence of those sorts of events that led me more towards a career in national security.
And another reader question, do you think more law schools should offer curriculum specifically about national security and encourage students to consider this field?
Well, definitely more and more law schools are doing so today, certainly than when I was in school. For example, I currently sit on the board of advisors for the Center for Law and Security at the NYU Law School, which has made significant strides in this direction. And more schools are doing that. But I'll tell you, in the late 90s, when I was in law school, you could count on one hand the number of classmates of mine that were similarly interested in national security law issues. And that, I think, has drastically changed, certainly post 9/11, but even more so in recent years. And the breadth of issues that national security law in its broadest sense encompasses is quite broad. Everything, of course, from cybersecurity to human rights issues to counterterrorism legal issues. And so it is only natural that more and more law schools can and should be offering these legal classes as part of their curriculum.
So touching on that, obviously, I don't want to, you just aged yourself. So I didn't call you out, but I'm thinking I was in law school also in, I guess, the mid 90s. And I mean, there was internet, but it wasn't such a thing. And I don't remember many classes on it, really, if any at all. We were much more concerned with watching the OJ low-speed chase, things like that. Are there things that you had taken, classes you had taken, experiences like the summer clerkship that really helped prepare you? And do you think it's important that students who are wanting to go into this have that specific experience, or could they do things to show their interest in other ways? Part of that multi-part question is, what are you looking for on a resume when someone comes to you looking to do this type of work?
Well, I think experience helps, but more importantly, interest, dedication, and mentorship are all really important elements in any young lawyer's career trajectory. For me, that was something that I found very valuable. My first job out of law school was as part of the honors program at the Department of Justice in an unrelated field, but nevertheless. And that experience stuck with me, so that when I got to have the opportunity to be the general counsel at the NSA, I was reflecting on my career and thought it would be really important to set up an honors program. And so during my time at NSA, we set up an honors program in the lawyer's office at NSA, specifically to encourage young lawyers directly out of law school or directly out of a clerkship to have an opportunity to learn what it means to be a national security lawyer in a very operational and intelligence-oriented environment.
That's really cool. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome. So when we initially talked for the print interview, you had said that throughout your career, you've never been afraid to ask questions. You're not afraid to speak up if you don't know something and admit that you don't know it. So I think sometimes that can be very scary for lawyers, for young lawyers in particular. And I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit on this, and why do you think, how has this been important to you in your career to be able to say, I need more information, or I don't know maybe that specific point?
Well, thank you, Jenny. I think the hardest thing I've had to learn as a lawyer is to have sufficient self-assurance to admit when I don't know something, and to not even think of it as an admission, frankly. When you're a young lawyer, it's really hard to do that because, one, most of us, I won't include everybody, most of us are insecure about what we know and don't know, and we want to prove ourselves. I think over time, with both experience and greater knowledge, I've come to appreciate that the answer is not to necessarily have all the answers at my fingertips, but of course to have good judgment to deal with the situation, to understand and appreciate how to obtain the knowledge I need to have. And most importantly, the worst thing you can do for a client is to try to cover up something you don't know. Clients will understand, government clients or private sector clients, if you don't have every single legal answer at the ready. And in fact, if you did, it would probably reflect a lack of creative thinking and a lack of openness to thinking about the legal question with which you're presented. And I'll tell you, the time it came into most focus was when I went to the NSA, which is a very technical environment and a very closed environment, given the classification of a lot of what they do. And so there's no way someone can step into an agency like that and have a deep baseline of knowledge. And I had to be relatively willing to admit when I don't know something and to learn on the technical side or on the intelligence side. And I think it's a good lesson for young lawyers to not be afraid to do that.
So when you had so many amazing opportunities throughout your career, but I know that all these opportunities were immense responsibilities and probably all had an incredible learning curve. Is there a specific decision-making process that you go through, maybe like a pro-con list or something more involved that you use to gauge whether you want to take on an opportunity, or you just like, heck yeah, it looks great, I got this? What's that thought process like for you?
Well, I think generally it's not as strategic as pro-con, but I do probably think about a few things that most of us think about. One is, am I interested in doing it, whatever the it is? Because it makes no sense to do something if you don't have a passion for doing it. Life is too short. Secondly, I think is this an opportunity where I could try to make some difference? Could I try to make the world better in some way? Whether that's improving something in the government or improving things on behalf of private clients, it doesn't matter. I mean that in the broadest sense. Can I help in some way? And then third is, assuming one is interested and assuming one feels like it's worthwhile, can you actually do it as a practical matter? We all live in a very practical world. We have families, we have obligations, we may have debt. And so it's very important, of course, to make choices within that reality. But I'll say I would generally tend to bend that reality if the other two are a yes. Whether or not there were times where there were some public service opportunities, it probably didn't make sense for family or for financial reasons, but opportunities are rare, and I'm a big fan of take a chance when you get it, because it may not come back.
Well, I mean, our print interview was all about going where the action is, too, and it seems like that has been, the light, the flame that has attracted you to all of these great roles.
Well, it certainly played a key part, sometimes wittingly and sometimes unwittingly, but yes.
Well, this seems like a good point to ask about work-life balance. You're married, you have 2 young children. I know that I'm assuming that the hours at the NSA and definitely at the White House were punishing. How did you deal with that? And also, how did you stay connected to deal with friends and family where something as simple as like, hey, what'd you do today at work? You probably couldn't answer that.
Well, on the balance front, I can probably say, honestly, I didn't strike much of a balance, which is unfortunate. We all go through points in life when that's the case. When I went to the White House, My children were 5 and 3, and that was 2 years. And then I spent 3 years at the NSA in the middle of the Snowden Affair. So you can imagine over that 5-year span, I missed, frankly, quite a lot. But I think now I'm trying to take every opportunity I have to protect family time. It's not always possible, of course, in any job, but I think it's really important to grow both professionally and personally in one's life. And now I have an opportunity to try to restrike that balance, and I want to take full advantage of it.
So let's go back to that time, the 2 years where you were at the White House. I have a reader who's asking, just how extensive was your assignment working with the president?
Very. The job was being staff secretary to President Obama, which is the job of managing all of the paper that goes to the president. Think of memos that he needs to review, decisions he needs to make that are on paper, executive orders he needs to sign, daily briefings for everything he has to manage that day, threat material that comes to him every day from the national security side of the house. So making sure all of that material was ready for him, ready to address the questions he would likely have, and to make sure it balanced the views of lots of different aspects of the federal government. If lawyers needed to review something, making sure they had engaged. If different parts of the policy establishment needed to have their views expressed, making sure they were being expressed. So it was very much of an honest broker role in the process, machinery of the White House. And we've all probably had jobs like this at some point in our lives. It was a job where if I did it well, nobody would notice. If I made a mistake, everybody would notice. And so those sometimes can be the most stressful sorts of roles, because the reward is the satisfaction of doing a good job, but they're very much behind the scenes.
Well, I imagine, I mean, he's a law professor, so he's probably able to parse through the nuances. You had to have your, like, IRAC on point, right?
Well, I would say that the president is as he should be, a tough customer. And I think that's what we would want in any president, somebody who's on the ball and who expects those around him to be at least as on the ball as he is.
I have skimmed over this by accident, but I want to go back because it's a reader question about your time as general counsel to the 9/11 Commission. Decisions from the Commission's report were implemented well and are still relevant today.
Yes, so I served as counsel to the 9/11 Commission, and the staff for the Commission was roughly 90 or so staff members. The part of the Commission's work I was most involved in was investigating and describing the narrative of the 9/11 plot itself. In other words, what were the bad guys doing that led to the events we're all aware of, and writing that out in narrative form. So it involved reviewing a lot of intelligence material from the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. In terms of the recommendations, there were some key recommendations, many of which have been implemented. Things like creating a director of national intelligence to make sure our intelligence community is sufficiently coordinated, creating a national counterterrorism center to make sure the dots are connected, that the CIA and the FBI, for example, are sufficiently integrated in terms of sharing information, and things like creating a privacy and civil liberties oversight board so that in the post 9/11 era, as our counterterrorism efforts grow, we're sufficiently cognizant of what trade-offs we're making in terms of privacy and civil liberties and making sure we're protecting those interests. And those were all recommendations that we worked into legislation when I was working on the Hill in Congress as a staff member for the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee immediately after the 9/11 Commission. But the lessons are very relevant today, not only because counterterrorism is still an active topic, but because some of the very themes, things like sharing information and making sure government is organized to deal with the threat, are still very relevant for new challenges like cybersecurity.
So now I'm going to take the interview in a more fun direction. Not that, you know, the 9/11 Commission wasn't just so much fun every day. Air Force One, when we talked, you'd said that you were on it, you had your assigned seat, but also that you literally traveled the world at one point with the president and his entourage. And I wanted to ask you, what was that like? I mean, if you weren't a rock star, you were certainly rock star adjacent. So how cool was it to be part of that?
I'll tell you, firstly, it's an experience that it was a total privilege to have. Either I or someone on my staff would have to travel with the president everywhere he went on global trips and domestic trips for that matter. And yes, on at least for one of those trips, we literally went around the globe, starting east, making a number of trips and coming back over the Pacific. I'd say the most amazing thing, though, was being in a group of people, including the president, of course, but his senior staff, that are so amazingly talented, hardworking, and public-spirited that it really encourages you to raise your own game. And that was the most amazing thing about doing that sort of work.
So we are almost out of time, but I wanted to get in two last questions from readers. Second to last question, working with the 9/11 Commission, with the president, and also with the NSA during the Snowden Affair, which of these posed the biggest challenge to you and why?
They each were challenging in a unique way. The 9/11 Commission was challenging because much like the rest of the staff and the rest of the country, after 9/11, we were all looking for some way to make order of what had happened. And in some small way, contributing to that report was helping that healing process. And I think we all intensely felt the obligation to do our best to help that national process. Working in the White House was challenging in some of the ways I described earlier because it was very intense with a very focused customer, literally the president himself. And then NSA was challenging largely because of what the Snowden Affair engendered. In other words, there were lots of stakeholders involved, whether it was the White House, the Congress, the media, foreign governments, technology companies, or the American public. And dealing with all of those constituencies and stakeholders in a very public and controversial way on a daily basis was extremely challenging.
So the biggest challenge of them all? Is there a winner?
Well, I think, honestly, there isn't, because like lots of things in life, they're challenging in different ways, and they force us all to grow in different ways. And I think I'm glad I had some of the experiences to build on, because they help you do a better job as you get further on in life.
So our final question, what was the best career advice that you have ever received?
Well, I'll have to go back to what's in the print article, which is when I was a junior associate, actually a summer associate at a law firm in Washington. I was making the decision at the end of the summer to return to the firm for permanent employment or to go into the government in the honors program, as I mentioned earlier. And I decided to join the Justice Department after clerking. And I was telling the managing partner of the firm, thinking that he would be either irritated or upset, but he honestly was very supportive and said, the best thing you can do in your legal career is to go where the action is. And at the time, I was joining the antitrust division at the Justice Department. This was the time of the big Microsoft case and a range of other high-profile antitrust matters. And that advice has served me well, whether it's antitrust or national security.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and for being so candid today. Those are all the questions we have at the end of our interview. I'd like to thank everybody watching today also for joining us. And if you like this interview, I'd like to invite you to join us again next month for our final session of the year. I'll be speaking with Shannon Liss-Reardon, and she is a plaintiff's lawyer in Boston, and she has been in the news recently for representing Uber drivers and for a proposed $100 million settlement. And that's set for Wednesday, November 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, thanks again, everyone, and be well.
Thank you.